We produce a lot of carbon dioxide. Every day we're burning fossil fuels to run our cars, heat our homes and power our industry. And the carbon dioxide that gets produced is the main driver behind climate change. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas that has the biggest impact on the climate globally. But how do we know just how much carbon dioxide we're putting into the atmosphere above us? And how do we work out whether things like planting trees can make a difference? NIWA has been measuring carbon dioxide in our air since 1972, right here at Bering Head. It's located on the south coast of Wellington. Head south out across the ocean there, and your next stop will be Antarctica. Gordon is an atmospheric researcher who works here. So Gordon, why do places like this make such ideal sites for studying carbon dioxide?
Yeah, so Bering Head is really ideal because we have two wind directions. In the southerly, the air comes off the ocean, and so the CO2 we measure from there doesn't change very much and gives us a good indication of what's happening globally. But then in the northerly, we see air coming off the North Island. It tells us about what New Zealand is producing or removing in terms of CO2.
Why is it important to measure carbon dioxide?
So carbon dioxide is a gas that when it's in the atmosphere can warm up the atmosphere. And since the start of the Industrial Revolution, the amount of carbon dioxide has increased. So when we started measuring carbon dioxide here in 1972, we had 325 parts per million. And now we're measuring 410 parts per million. What we see over time is that each decade, the rate of increase in that CO2 is getting faster. So each decade, it increases at a faster rate than the previous decade.
So how can we reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere?
We've got two sides to that. One is, what are we putting into the atmosphere? One of the main things that's driving CO2 up is the amount of fossil fuels that we're introducing into the atmosphere. And so if we can dramatically reduce the amount of fossil fuels that we're using, that will change that balance of CO2 going into the atmosphere. On the other side, if we increase the processes that remove CO2, and that's things like trees that take CO2 out of the atmosphere, then we can assist the atmosphere to lower the amount of CO2 by sucking it out.
So how do native plants like this one help create carbon sinks?
Yeah, good question, Sam. So they've got leaves which are like little solar cells on the top, which are taking in the energy from the sun, and underneath they have little pores called stomata that we can look at with a microscope, and actually that's where the plant takes in the CO2 and puts out the oxygen. So we can use a microscope like this to actually look underneath the leaf there and see on our phone here what the stomata look like. And this is a CO2 instrument, and it measures a bit like the one at Bering Head. At the moment on the phone you can see the CO2 level at the coming in the end of the tube. Now if you were to breathe into that, we'll see the CO2 level go up as the CO2 from your breath when you breathe out comes to the instrument. Likewise, if we were to put a bag over our plant and then put the tube in there, we'll see the CO2 level go down. And so if we wait a few minutes, the CO2 in that bag will drop and we'll be able to measure that change.
So 5 minutes is up, let's measure the changes.
Yeah, let's put this tube inside the bag. So we've been measuring in ambient air, sort of around 412. And if we put this tube up inside the bag, we're going to measure what the CO2 level has gone to as the plant has taken out that CO2. It's dropping 320, 330, 270. That's a lot of CO2 taken out by one little plant. Of course, this is just one plant, but you can imagine scaling that up to a whole forest and a whole country, and all of these trees make a difference in taking that carbon out of the air.
We can see where the CO2 is going up, and we can also measure it going down if we make changes. But we've seen that native plants and forests can really help to turn things around. we know the most important thing to do is to make changes to cut down the amount of CO2 we're putting into the atmosphere in the first place.